Imagine standing on the edge of a racetrack, watching a motorcycle scream past you at over 350 kilometers per hour. The ground shakes, the air cracks. The rider's knee is literally scraping the asphalt through a corner that would terrify you in a car doing half that speed. And then another bike appears right behind, even closer to the edge. That is Grand Prix motorcycle racing, and for 76 years, it has kept producing a very specific kind of human, the kind who can do things on two wheels at 350 kilometers per hour that shouldn't be physically possible. 15 world titles for one rider, 9 titles across 4 different bike classes for another, a comeback from an arm so broken that doctors were ready to amputate, leading to a 7th World Championship more than 6 years later. These are the stories of how MotoGP kept producing impossible champions, and some of them are wilder than anything Hollywood could dream up. That was September 2025 at the Motegi circuit in Japan. Marc Marquez had just clinched his 7th MotoGP World Championship on a Ducati, ending a 2,184-day gap between titles. The longest drought and arguably the greatest comeback in the history of the sport. So how did motorcycle racing keep producing legends like this? To understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning, back to a time when the bikes had no electronics, the tracks had no runoff, and racing was as likely to kill you as it was to make you famous. If you'd asked anyone in the small town of Lavere near Bergamo, Italy, about a young Giacomo Agostini back in 1962, they would have told you he was just the eldest son of a local civil servant. A kid who loved motorcycles a little too much. They had no idea what was coming. Agostini's father hated the idea of his son racing, hated it. So Giacomo did what any self-respecting future legend would do. He raced in secret, entering local hill climbs without telling his family. By 1963, he caught the eye of Count Morini's factory team and won the Italian 175 cubic centimeters championship. A year later, his performances at the West German and Nations Grand Prix were impressive enough to earn a call from the most dominant team in motorcycle racing, MV Agusta. MV Agusta was the Italian equivalent of Ferrari for 2 wheels. They signed Agostini in 1965 as an understudy to the reigning king of the sport, a British rider named Mike Hailwood. Hailwood was already a superstar. The son of a wealthy motorcycle dealer, he had the best bikes money could buy and the talent to match. They called him Mike the Bike, and by 1965 he already held 4 consecutive 500 cubic centimeters world titles. What happened next between these two riders at the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy would become one of the defining moments in racing history. The 1967 Senior TT, June 16th, Agostini's 25th birthday. Hailwood had moved to Honda, and the stage was set for the ultimate showdown on the 37.73-mile mountain course. Agostini set a new lap record on his opening lap at over 108 miles per hour. Hailwood answered the very next lap with 108.77 miles per hour, a record that would stand for 8 years. During Hailwood's pit stop, his twist grip came loose and he grabbed a hammer and beat it back into place himself, losing nearly 48 seconds. The two were almost level again when Agostini's drive chain snapped at Windy Corner, just kilometers from the finish. He threw his helmet to the ground in frustration. Hailwood won at a record average of 105.62 miles per hour. Agostini later told Dainese in an interview that he had about a 7-second lead on the last lap and could already see a great victory. Then the chain broke and he lost that great occasion. That loss burned, and it lit a fire under Agostini that the sport had never seen. Over the next decade, Giacomo Agostini assembled a record that borders on absurd. 15 world titles, 8 in the 500 cubic centimeters class, 7 in the 350 cubic centimeters class, 122 Grand Prix victories, still the all-time record across all classes. He finished on the podium 159 times in 223 starts, a 71% rate. He once won 20 consecutive 500 cubic centimeters races, 20 in a row, and he did all of this on circuits that would make a modern MotoGP rider refuse to race. No air fences, no gravel traps, stone walls, telegraph poles, and ditches lining the track. Riders died every single season. It was not a question of if a rider you knew would be killed. It was when. In 1972, everything shifted. Agostini's close friend Gilberto Parlotti was killed racing at the Isle of Man TT. Agostini declared he would never race the mountain course again. His boycott, joined by Phil Reed and other top riders, carried enough weight to eventually force the TT off the Grand Prix calendar entirely by 1976. Then in 1974, Agostini did something Valentino Rossi would echo 30 years later. He left MV Agusta for Yamaha. The following year, he won the 500 cubic centimeters title on the YZR 500, becoming the first rider to win the Premier class on a two-stroke. His final victory came at the Nürburgring in 1976, the same circuit where he had won his first Grand Prix 11 years earlier. Agostini's theme was dominance. Pure, statistical, inarguable dominance. The next impossible champion would be defined by something completely different. Hailwood's story, meanwhile, took a path nobody could have predicted. After Honda withdrew from Grand Prix racing at the end of 1967, they paid Hailwood £50,000, over $1 million in today's money, specifically to not race for anyone else. So he turned to Formula One. At the 1973 South African Grand Prix at Kyalami, Hailwood pulled the unconscious Clay Regazzoni from a burning car while his own suit caught fire. He received the George Medal, Britain's second highest civilian gallantry award. A crash at the Nürburgring in 1974 ended his car racing career with a shattered knee. He moved to New Zealand to retire. And that should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. In 1978, at age 38, 11 full years after his last motorcycle Grand Prix, Mike Hailwood showed up at the Isle of Man on a Ducati 900 SS and won the Formula One TT race. The crowd went absolutely wild. It remains one of the most emotional moments in motorcycle racing history. Hailwood won again in 1979, taking the senior TT on a Suzuki RG500 for his 14th and final TT victory. Then on Saturday, March 21, 1981, Hailwood was driving to pick up fish and chips with his 9-year-old daughter Michelle and 7-year-old son David near Tanworth in Arden in England. A lorry made an illegal U-turn through the central reservation barriers. The collision killed Michelle instantly. Mike died of his injuries 2 days later at Selly Oak Hospital. He was 40 years old. Part of the TT course is now named Hailwood's Height in his honor. If Agostini represented dominance and Hailwood represented pure natural talent, the next impossible champion would bring revolution. In 1978, the same year Hailwood made his fairy tale comeback at the TT, a Californian dirt tracker named Kenny Roberts walked into the European-dominated 500 cubic centimeter World Championship and turned the entire sport upside down. Roberts won the title as a rookie on a Yamaha YZR 500. Barry Sheene had publicly dismissed him as no threat beforehand. Roberts proved him spectacularly wrong. He won 3 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter world titles from 1978 to 1980, becoming the first American Premier Class champion. His dirt track-derived throttle steer technique and his knee-down cornering style completely changed how Grand Prix riders approached a racetrack. Every single MotoGP rider today owes something to Kenny Roberts. Roberts also changed how the sport worked off the track. In 1979, he and other top riders threatened to create a breakaway World Series over poor safety standards. That threat forced the FIM to professionalize the sport, improve circuit safety, and start paying riders properly. Without Roberts, there is no modern MotoGP. His influence ran even deeper. He managed a team that won 3 500 cubic centimeter world titles with Wayne Rainey. Freddie Spencer, who pulled off the unmatched feat of winning both the 500 and the 250 cubic centimeter titles in the same year, 1985, was part of the American wave Roberts started. And Roberts' son, Kenny Jr., won the 500 cubic centimeter title in 2000, making them the only father-son Premier Class champions. The late 1980s and early 1990s belonged to 2 rivalries that fans still argue about today. First, Wayne Rainey versus Kevin Schwantz. Rainey was calculated and metronomic on a motorcycle. Schwantz, the Texan on the Lucky Strike Suzuki, was his polar opposite, elbows out, bike sliding sideways, crossing finish lines with the rear wheel spinning. If Rainey was a surgeon, Schwantz was a bar fighter on 2 wheels. Rainey won 3 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter titles from 1990 to 1992. Their 1991 German Grand Prix at Hockenheim produced one of the most replayed finishes ever. On the final lap, Schwantz made a sea god then brake pass into the stadium section and beat Rainey by 16 thousandths of a second. You cannot blink that fast. Their rivalry ended in the worst way imaginable. On September 5, 1993 at Misano, Rainey crashed at turn 1 on lap 11 and shattered his 6th thoracic vertebra. He was paralyzed from the chest down. Schwantz inherited the championship lead and won his only world title. He has spoken openly about how hollow that championship felt. Then came the Australian, who nearly lost his leg. Mick Doohan was racing 500 cubic centimeter Hondas alongside Wayne Gardner, Australia's first 500 cubic centimeter world champion in 1987, and by the middle of 1992, Doohan had won 5 of the first 7 races and led Kevin Schwantz by 53 points. He looked untouchable. On June 26, 1992 at the Dutch TT at Assen, Doohan crashed in practice and fractured both the tibia and fibula of his right leg. A local Dutch surgeon used plates and screws rather than the rod Honda's team preferred, and gave him an epidural instead of full anesthesia. Doohan later told Motorsport magazine that during the operation, he could feel the power tools rattling through his bones. The surgeon then immobilized the leg in a way that caused compartment syndrome, cutting off blood flow entirely. By the next morning, the leg was starting to smell like rotting meat. Amputation was the next step. He was airlifted to Dr. Claudio Costa's famous Clinica Mobile, then to Costa's clinic in Bologna. What Costa did next sounds like science fiction. He surgically attached Doohan's healthy left leg to his dying right leg for 14 days, allowing the blood circulation from the healthy limb to nourish the damaged one and save it from amputation. Doohan missed 8 weeks. He came back for the final 2 rounds with the leg still infected and bleeding. He lost the 1992 championship to Wayne Rainey by just 4 points. This decision to come back too early seemed reckless at the time. It was a warning sign of the kind of man Doohan was. He did not know how to stop. After further surgery to straighten the bent leg, Doohan adapted. From 1993 onward, he used a thumb-operated rear brake because his right foot simply could not work a pedal anymore, and then he absolutely destroyed the competition. 5 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter world titles from 1994 to 1998. Only Agostini's 7 straight had been longer. In his peak year of 1997, he won 12 of 15 races. With a leg that doctors had nearly amputated 5 years earlier and a thumb brake because his right foot could barely move, his chief mechanic, Jeremy Burgess, would later become Valentino Rossi's chief mechanic, providing a direct link between 2 of the greatest eras in the sport. A qualifying crash at the 1999 Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez finally ended Doohan's career. Turn 1 at Phillip Island, his home circuit, is named Doohan Corner. If Agostini was dominance, Hailwood was talent, and Roberts was revolution, Doohan was resilience. And the kid who would inherit his mechanic was about to become something the sport had never seen. By the time Doohan retired, a skinny teenager from the tiny Italian coastal town of Tavullia was already tearing through the junior classes in a way nobody had ever seen. Valentino Rossi, the doctor, the man who turned motorcycle racing into a global spectacle. Rossi was the son of Graziano Rossi, a 1970s Grand Prix rider. The famous number 46 was his father's race number. He debuted in the 125 cubic centimeter class in 1996 at age 17, won that title in 1997, took the 250 cubic centimeter crown in 1999, and then stepped up to the 500 cubic centimeter class and won that championship in 2001, the last ever 2-stroke premier title. When MotoGP switched to 4 strokes in 2002, Rossi dominated again, winning back-to-back titles on the Honda RC211V. And then he did something that shocked everyone in the paddock. He left Honda for Yamaha. The move mirrored what Agostini had done 30 years earlier, leaving the dominant factory for an underdog. Everyone thought Rossi was crazy. The opening round of 2004 was at Welcome in South Africa. Rossi won, beating Max Biaggi by 0.2 of a second. After crossing the finish line, he parked the Yamaha against a wall of tires and sat alone, trackside with his helmet on. Rossi has called Welcome 2004 his masterpiece and the highlight of his career. The personality Rossi brought was unlike anything motorcycle racing had experienced. custom helmet designs that changed at every Grand Prix, elaborate post-victory celebrations with costumes and props. The Mark Neal documentaries, Faster, Fastest, and Hitting the Apex, narrated by Brad Pitt, were built around his charisma and made MotoGP a global entertainment property. His rivalry with Max Biaggi gave MotoGP its first real soap opera. At the 2001 Catalan Grand Prix, the two reportedly got into a physical altercation on the podium stairwell. Biaggi showed up with a cut under his eye that he dismissed as a mosquito bite. Rossi attempted a move to Ducati for 2011 and 2012, and it was a disaster, 3 podiums in 2 seasons. He returned to Yamaha in 2013, and his 89th and final Premier Class victory came at Assen in 2017. He retired after the Valencia Grand Prix on November 14, 2021, having started 432 Grand Prix across 26 seasons, both all-time records, 7 Premier Class titles, 89 top-class wins, 115 victories across all classes, 235 podiums, and a VR46 Academy in Tavullia that produced the next generation, including Francesco Bagnaia, back-to-back MotoGP champion in 2022 and 2023. Rossi did not just win races, he built an entire ecosystem that keeps producing champions after he hung up his leathers. If you're getting value from this, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. Rossi was charisma, the champion who turned a niche sport into a global brand. The 2 riders who challenged his throne brought their own forms of impossible. Casey Stoner first raced aged 4. He moved to the UK as a teenager because Australia's strict junior licensing laws would not let him compete at the level he needed. He reached MotoGP with the LCR Honda satellite team in 2006 and immediately showed electric pace. In 2007, riding the Ducati Desmosedici GP7, Stoner won 10 of 18 races and claimed the championship. It was Ducati's first ever Premier Class title. Before Francesco Bagnaia repeated the feat in 2022, Stoner was the only rider to have ever given Ducati a MotoGP championship. Stoner's rivalry with Rossi reached its boiling point at the 2008 United States Grand Prix at Laguna Seca. On lap 23, Rossi made one of the most audacious overtakes in the sport's history, cutting through the gravel on the inside of the famous corkscrew at turns 8 and 8A to retake the lead. Stoner ran wide and finished second. At the 2011 Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez, when Rossi low-sided into Stoner and took him out, then visited the Honda garage to apologize, Stoner's reply became one of the sport's most quoted lines: "Your ambition outweighed your talent." Stoner won a second world title on Honda in 2011, then stunned everyone by announcing his retirement at age 27. He cited burnout and the politics of the sport. He walked away with 38 wins and one of the highest win percentages in MotoGP history. Meanwhile, Rossi's most consequential rival was already sharing his garage. Jorge Lorenzo, the glacial Spaniard riding number 99, was the anti-Rossi in every way. Where Rossi was expressive, Lorenzo was robotic. His lines through corners were so smooth that engineers studied his data like a textbook. Lorenzo won back-to-back 250 cubic centimeter titles in 2006 and 2007 before joining Rossi at Fiat Yamaha for 2008. He took pole on his MotoGP debut and won in only his 3rd race. The teammate war was so intense that Yamaha reportedly installed a physical partition between their sides of the pit garage. Lorenzo won 3 MotoGP world titles in 2010, 2012, and 2015. That 2015 championship would become the most controversial in modern MotoGP history. Going into the Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang in October 2015, Rossi led Lorenzo by 11 points with 3 races remaining. Marc Marquez, who we will get to in a moment, was mathematically out of contention, yet at Phillip Island the week before he had engaged Lorenzo in a frantic last lap battle rather than pulling away. Rossi's team suspected Marquez was deliberately helping Lorenzo. At the pre-race press conference, Rossi said it publicly. Marquez appeared stunned. Lorenzo shot back that Marquez helped him so much that he beat him. In Sunday's race, Rossi and Marquez battled for 3rd behind Dani Pedrosa and Lorenzo. On lap 7, Rossi slowed almost to walking pace through turns 13 and 14 to push Marquez offline, and Marquez went down. Honda's data allegedly showed Rossi kicked Marquez's brake lever. Rossi maintained Marquez leaned into his leg. The slow motion footage shows both things happening almost simultaneously, and the debate has never been resolved. Race direction gave Rossi 3 penalty points, which forced him to start the season finale at Valencia from the back of the grid. He fought through the field to 4th. Lorenzo, starting from pole, won the race and claimed the world championship by 5 points. Rossi described the penalty as cutting him off by the legs. To this day, Rossi has called the events unforgivable, according to a 2020 interview with the race. The two men have barely spoken since. Now, Marc Marquez. The rider at the center of that 2015 storm had already rewritten every record book in the sport before that controversy even happened. Born in Cervera, Catalonia in 1993, Marquez carries number 93 for his birth year. Marquez won the 125 cubic centimeter world title in 2010 and the Moto 2 title in 2012. He stepped up to MotoGP in 2013 with Repsol Honda and immediately did something nobody expected. At the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, in just his second MotoGP race, he became the youngest ever Premier Class winner at 20 years and 63 days old, breaking Freddie Spencer's 30-year record. He clinched the 2013 championship with a third-place finish at Valencia. At 20 years and 266 days old, he was the youngest Premier Class champion in history and the first rookie champion since 1978. His 2014 season was arguably the single most dominant season in MotoGP history. He won the first 10 races consecutively, matching Agostini's 1970 achievement, and finished with 13 wins total, breaking Mick Doohan's 1997 record of 12. By the end of 2019, Marquez had won 6 MotoGP championships in 7 seasons at age 26. He seemed destined to shatter every record in the sport. Everything was in place for a run at history. Marquez just didn't know what was about to happen to his right arm. July 19, 2020, the season-opening Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez. Marquez was leading the race when he crashed and rejoined, charging from 16th back up to 3rd. Then on lap 21 of 25, a violent high side at turn 3 sent him flying. Alpine Stars estimated the peak impact at nearly 26 G-forces. The bike struck his arm during the crash. His right humerus was fractured. Dr. Xavier Mir installed a titanium plate at the Dexius University Hospital in Barcelona 2 days later. 5 days after that, Marquez controversially attempted to race at the same circuit the following weekend. He got through practice but withdrew on Saturday. His physiotherapist Carlos Garcia later called that attempted comeback Marquez's biggest mistake. 3 more surgeries followed: a second plate replacement in August 2020, an 8-hour surgery in December 2020 for pseudarthrosis, an infection that prevented the bone from fusing, requiring an iliac crest bone graft, and finally, a 4th surgery at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota in June 2022 to derotate the humerus, which had healed more than 30 degrees out of alignment. To put this in perspective, Marquez had his upper arm bone broken, plated, replated, bone grafted, and finally rotated back into position over the course of 2 years. And people wondered if he would ever ride a MotoGP bike competitively again. He returned in 2021 and won 3 races, including an emotional victory at the Sachsenring, where the crowd gave him a standing ovation. In 2022, recurring double vision forced more time off. The Mayo Clinic surgery followed in June. By the end of 2023, after years of struggling on a Honda that had fallen behind the competition, Marquez made a decision that stunned the paddock. He severed his lifetime relationship with Honda. Multiple reports indicated Honda had offered a contract extension worth a reported 15 to 20 million euros per year, with some estimates putting the total package at around 100 million euros over 4 years. Marquez walked away from all of it to ride a year-old Ducati at the Gresini satellite team for essentially no base salary. He was betting everything on proving himself on a completely different machine. In 2024, riding the previous year's Ducati GP23, while the factory riders had the latest machine, Marquez won 3 Grand Prix. His first victory, at Aragon, came 1,043 days after his previous win. He finished 3rd in the championship and signed with the factory Ducati Lenovo team for 2025. It is worth pausing here to appreciate how far the machines have come. When Agostini won his first title in 1966, the bikes made around 70 horsepower. Doohan's 500 cubic centimeters Honda made around 180 horsepower. Today's 1,000 cubic centimeters MotoGP machines produce over 280 horsepower and have been clocked at 363 kilometers per hour. They use aerodynamic winglets, ride height devices, carbon brakes, and spec Michelin tires. The 2027 regulations will drop to 850 cubic centimeters in yet another attempt to manage speeds that have begun to outpace human reaction times. Through all of that, one thing has stayed constant. The bravery required to pin the throttle on the exit of a 200 kilometers per hour corner with your knee on the ground and your elbow centimeters from the asphalt has not changed one bit. What followed in 2025 was complete demolition. 11 victories. A 7th MotoGP world title clinched at Motegi, Japan, on September 28, 2025. According to ESPN and MotoGP.com, exactly 2,184 days had passed since his last championship, the longest gap between Premier Class titles ever. He simultaneously holds the records for youngest Premier champion in history and oldest MotoGP era champion at 32. He is only the 6th rider ever to win Premier titles with different manufacturers, joining Agostini, Rossi, Stoner, Eddie Lawson, and Jeff Duke. We cannot tell the story of MotoGP's impossible champions without talking about the ones the sport lost along the way. The names of the riders who paid the ultimate price are woven into every circuit, every safety barrier, and every rule change in the modern era. Marco Simoncelli. The charismatic Italian with the wild, curly hair, Rossi's friend and protege. He was the 2008 250 cubic centimeter world champion. On October 23, 2011, at the Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang, Simoncelli low-sided on lap 2 in turn 11. His bike gripped and swerved back across the racing line, where he was struck by Colin Edwards and Rossi himself. His helmet came off on impact. He was declared dead at the circuit at 4:56 p.m. local time. He was 24 years old. The race was canceled. MotoGP retired his number 58, and the Misano circuit was renamed the Misano World Circuit Marco Simoncelli. Nicky Hayden, the Kentucky Kid, the last American to win the MotoGP World Championship, taking the 2006 title on the Repsol Honda by 5 points over Valentino Rossi in one of the most dramatic finales in history. On May 17, 2017, Hayden was cycling on a road near Misano in Italy when he was struck by a car. He died 5 days later at age 35. His number 69 was retired from MotoGP. Turn 18 at the Circuit of the Americas is named Hayden Hill and painted with his number, Angel Nieto, Spain's first Grand Prix world champion. 13 titles across the 50 cubic centimeter and 125 cubic centimeter classes, although the famously superstitious Nieto always insisted on calling it 12+1. He grew up in poverty in Madrid and raced his first event at 13 on a borrowed derby, forging his father's signature on the entry form. His 90 Grand Prix victories across 5 different manufacturers remain 4th on the all-time list. His commentary on Spanish television is widely credited with building MotoGP into a national obsession, paving the way for the Spanish dynasty that dominates the grid today. Nieto died on August 3, 2017, at age 70 after a quad bike accident on Ibiza. The Jerez circuit was renamed in his honor. Daijiro Kato was killed at the 2003 Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka. Shoya Tomizawa died at Misano in Moto2 in 2010. Luis Salom died during practice at the 2016 Catalan Grand Prix, leading to a circuit redesign. Jason Dupasquier was killed in Moto3 qualifying at Mugello in 2021. Modern safety has improved enormously. Airbag leathers, gravel traps, safer barriers, the Clinica Mobile. And yet injury sagas like Marquez's 2020 crash still define careers. These riders know the risk. They race anyway. So after everything we have covered, from the 1960s to 2025, from stone wall-lined circuits to carbon fiber winglets, who is the greatest motorcycle racer of all time? The honest answer is that it depends on what you value, and that is what makes this debate one of the best in all of sports. If you measure by pure statistics, Giacomo Agostini stands alone. 15 world titles, 122 Grand Prix victories, a 71% podium rate, 7 consecutive 500 cubic centimeter championships. Records set in the 1960s and 70s that nobody has touched half a century later. He raced when the Isle of Man TT was a championship round, when riders died with terrifying regularity, and when the bikes had a fraction of today's electronic safety systems. His contemporaries, legends like Freddie Spencer, Kevin Schwantz, and Eddie Lawson, overwhelmingly back Agostini as the greatest when asked. If you measure by cultural impact, Valentino Rossi has no equal. He won titles in 4 different classes across 26 seasons, the only rider in history to have done that. He made MotoGP a global brand that attracted fans who had never sat on a motorcycle. His VR46 Academy produced the next generation of champions. He did not just win races, he built an entire ecosystem. And his 432 career starts tell you something about longevity that no other rider can match. And if you measure by resilience and adaptability, Marc Marquez stands at the peak. He went from the youngest champion in history to a rider who could barely lift his right arm. 4 surgeries over 2 years. He walked away from what may have been the richest contract in the sport's history, joined a satellite team for no guaranteed salary, and won a 7th title on a completely different manufacturer's bike. His 2,184-day gap between championships is the longest ever, and the comeback is arguably the greatest in all of motorsport. There is also the ERA argument. Agostini dominated with fewer competitors and fewer races per season. Rossi competed in the most talent-dense era the sport had seen. Marquez beat Rossi, Lorenzo, Pedrosa, and Dovizioso, then came back to beat the next generation. No fair comparison exists across all 3 eras, and the danger level has changed enormously. Agostini owns the numbers, Rossi owns the culture, Marquez owns the comeback. Each of them redefined what was possible in their era, and honestly, that might be the best answer the sport will ever get. Their legacies survive in the corner names painted on circuits around the world. Doohan Corner at Phillip Island, Hailwood's Height on the TT Mountain Course, Stoner Corner at Phillip Island Turn 3, Lorenzo Corner at Jerez, Hayden Hill at Austin, Marquez Corner at Aragon. And Rossi's number 46 was retired at the 2022 Italian Grand Prix at Mugello. The bikes got faster, the danger never left. And somewhere right now, another kid is dreaming of becoming the next impossible champion.